I think it was Andy Edwards, you know Andy? It's like he was on Beato, just like a English commentator on music.
Andy Edwards. Never heard of him.
Over the years, I've come on here and regularly taken pot shots at some of the classic albums that are out there. I've done this many a time now, you know, trying to come up with those 10 albums that I absolutely hate. Now, to hate an album is not just to find it boring or for the music to be not your taste. No, it has to annoy you. It has to really get your goat.
Watch this. This came out of nowhere.
Jesus. I'm fucking sick of these goats!
And because I haven't been doing these hate videos recently, I thought, you know, after a few years and sort of gaining the experience of doing what I do here on YouTube, I might, you know, revisit it and say, what are the 10 ones that get on my nerves? And what's interesting is when I do that, the old favourites come up. And also albums come up that I haven't really spoken about that much. Ones that are really obvious that I've never bothered to include. Now these have to be classic albums. These have to be 5-star albums. These have to be albums that the critics like and will champion, and that you feel that you are a more worthy person by saying you like these albums. That usually is the case. Now, there's certain albums on here that I think people they'll know where I'm coming from, but I think there's a couple where I might be in a very small minority of haters of this album. Stop bloody messaging me, everybody. Forgot to switch it all off. I make it all quiet. Hang on, I'll do that now. Bloody people messaging me all the time. Why do I have to be popular and interesting to people? Right, so this is like a sort of, it's bringing together a lot of ideas I've had. Now, some of these albums I've really criticised in the past in great detail. So I might find it a little bit difficult to come up with anything new to say about them, but that's part of the challenge. I nearly didn't do this. I thought, you've spoken about these so many times. You know, can you say any more about them? Well, I don't know. That is the challenge of this video. Shut up, people. I got my laptop here. I don't know. I suppose I can mute it. Then it won't make a sound, will it? Bloody people. People get on my nerves. You know when they say people who need people are the luckiest people. No, they're the unluckiest people. The lucky people are the people who don't need people. Right? Like these types of monks who go off and they decide not to speak for like 40 years. They're the happy ones, right? People who go off and live in the forest in a caravan and they just eat squirrels and, you know, and have their nuts buried around like a squirrel. And when it's cold, they go and dig those up, you know, and they have like, you know, like a shortwave radio that will only pick up some channel that they can't understand the language of, so they don't get perverted by the stupid ideas of bloody people. And this is the problem, you see. People on the whole are stupid. Okay, this is why we have democracy. Democracy is where you vote someone who's supposedly clever to run things because you're too stupid to run it yourself. And the check that you have is that when they are also stupid like you can vote them out. That's it. You know, that's how it works. And people are stupid, okay? Now, one thing about music is, unlike the other art forms where if you're a painter, right, the people who are assessing your paintings will be at least interested in paintings. Not you, not what your haircut's like, not who you have sex with. They won't be interested in that. They might if they do a biography of you, but it's not the main thing. The main thing they're going to talk about is the paintings, right? It's the same with authors. It's the same with filmmakers and films. You know, we appreciate the actual thing itself. It's not like that with music. To appreciate the musical aspects of something is almost like, to a certain mindset, elitist. Now, who are these people accusing people of being elitists? People who've got too much virtuosity or write songs that are too complex or sing about subjects which you shouldn't sing about, like science fiction-y subjects or maybe sword and sorcery or medieval stories. It's all a bit cliched, that. It's all a bit sad when you do that. No, you've got to be cool. You've got to be cool like James Brown was cool. That was wrong, wasn't it? You've got to be cool like James Dean was cool. So there's all these soft-handed, bloody, liberal, middle-class people who weren't good enough to play an instrument, who've got their jobs into some position where they can critique music and aware of their own inadequacies in being able to talk about it, but feeling completely above everybody else. They decide to turn their inadequacies into the way of patronising everybody else. And they all sit round the table, all the bloody elites with all their uncles and aunties and mums and dads who are very, very rich and got them a job on Rolling Stone magazine. And they all sit down there and go, what should we do next? How about the best 500 albums? Well, it's got to be Velvet Underground, hasn't it? Why? Because Velvet Underground can't play the instruments and they're not particularly good looking, but they're more like me, middle class, intellectual, and I think by having a little bit of a shaggy haircut, wearing dark clothes, putting dark sunglasses on, I become James Dean, not James Brown. And these types, for some reason, for decades, because of the way the bloody world works, they controlled the bloody narrative, to use a sort of postmodernist term. They controlled the narrative. Then the internet comes along, doesn't it? And people like me come up and I start saying, the best album in the world is not Pet Sounds, it's Visions of the Emerald Beyond by the Bavish Nuksha. And loads of people go, I think Andy's right, because when I listen to that, it gives me pure joy. And it has done for 30 years. And on every level, it's just an absolute wonderful musical experience. And Pet Sounds isn't. That just sounds horrible to me. Yeah, it was quite, innovative at the time. And some of the songs are okay, but in the end, it envisions the Emerald Beyond. Is it? It's not a Love Supreme. Is it? It's not Close to the Edge. I'm not a big fan of Pink Floyd, but when I put Dark Side of the Moon on, it deeply moves me. It moves me in a way that bloody, the Velvet Underground don't move me. That's just a jangly mess. People singing about being heroin addicts. It's quite endearing in a way. But in the end, pop music paraded as something deep, which is what Velvet Underground is, does not make great art now with Velvet Underground on this list. No, because I've got to be honest, I've got some of their albums, and if I put them in on the car, it would be a one listen, but I wouldn't hate it. When the pop hits come out, Venus in Furs, I'm Waiting for My Man, I can probably rock along, Not giving it much thought, not having to get involved in the whole heroin, outsider Andy Warhol chic of that band. I don't have to get involved in it. I can just appreciate it for what it is, which is okay rock music. Right? Is it AC/DC? No, it's not. So, we have 10 albums here. And I'm going to go through them. And they're ranked from 10 to 1. This will all be pretty obvious to you, those of you who watch the channel. But I promise you, the challenge here is not to say what I said before and actually find more surrealistic depth within these choices. More Edwards insanity. That's where we've got to go on this one. Right, because in the end, it's why do I hate these? Why am I like this? Why is it that I enjoy, and you enjoy, it seems, me coming on here and getting angry? Angry with who? Who am I angry with? Am I angry with the people who made these records? Well, some of them I am, but some of them I'm not. We've done the obligatory 10-minute introduction, right? That sorted the men out from the boys. Those of you who can't take anything that lasts long for 2 minutes and just want the list, you've all buggered off now. There's no point in you being here anyway. But those of you who want to stick around to see what I'm actually going to say rather than just hearing the list itself, have done 10 minutes worth of watching. That's the usual watch time, right? I do this on deliberate. I look at the usual, my usual watch time is 15 minutes. So I do a 10-minute introduction. This is basically antithetical to YouTube. Right, what I should do is come on here, say what I'm going to do, and then start doing it straight away. Get through the list after about 15 minutes. Those lot have stayed for that 20 minutes because they've got the list, and then introduce some new idea that holds them to the end. All right, that is possibly the better way of doing it. I used to do that in the old days. Maybe that's why I'm not getting the views, because now I'm more interested in the tortuous and twisty road that I'm on at the moment. Right? As I put off dipping my toe into this list. As I thrash around in the shallow depths of the early parts of my video, trying to find some angle. Trying to find some point on the horizon that I can aim at. And I now know what that is. And I will point the stern of my boat, that's the front bit, isn't it? I will point the stern of my boat to the distant shores of truth, and I will begin to row. Now. And here I am. Put the bloody mic on, Andy. This mic's all right. I could just put it on the table. It would still work. But I'll pin it on myself. Here I am, donning the white robes of truth. This is a new thing that I've started to do on here. I did feel a few weeks ago, after working with Danny Sapko, I thought I need to get a look, you know, but I didn't want to go for the sort of gay northern punk dwarf look that Danny goes for. I wanted to go for something that was much more spiritual and enlightened. And I got that hat, and I'll be wearing that hat, trying to be, I'm not comfortable in it, but the idea that I could introduce the video for about 10 minutes and then transform like Mr. Bed into my white robes, because the white robes give me a sense of gravitas. They give me a sense of self-worth. That what I'm about to do now is actually quite sacred within the aesthetic, cultural sort of the aesthetic, cultural time we find ourselves in. Right, you want me to start now, don't you, and not keep bloody treading water on this one. So we will. So number 10, let's start with this band. Do I hate this band? Yes. Do I know much about this band? No. Right? Why have I pulled out this album in particular? Is it because it's the one you hate the most? No. The reason why I pulled this album out is because Rolling Stone put it in the top 50 albums. And there's no way this album should be in the top 50 albums. It shouldn't even be in the top 3,000 albums. This album is called Is This It? And it's by The Strokes. Right? Now, I've only actually listened to this album once, but once was enough for me. Right? Because the Strokes represent the embodiment, the commercial embodiment. They are like the equivalent of NSYNC. NSYNC is a boy band put together to please prepubescent girls, right? But if you were not to put a band together under those rules, but wants to, you know, fulfill all the needs of those soft-handed, soft-shouldered, liberal, weak men who, just because their parents are well off, find themselves at the NME or Melody Maker or on some YouTube or website or even bloody Rolling Stone, where they can inflict their idea of what great music is, which is, as I said, is the idea that they are this sort of critical James Dean, and they go out exposing the sort of innate wonder of musicians that have just, you know, explored the viscerality of rock 70 years after rock emerged. There they are. Now, you know, a few decades back, that band was The Strokes, wasn't it? And we all had to like The Strokes. There they came out with their curly hair and their dark sunglasses, a sort of AI version of a Velvet Underground, but for the 90s or 2000s. Was it the 2000s when they came out? They were the posh boys who had gone, Daddy, I don't want to get a job. Don't worry, son, you won't need to get a job. But I really don't want to get a job. Well, what do you want to do? do then? I'd like to be in a cool rock band, take loads of drugs and have really hot girlfriends because I'm in such a rock band as I am. I know I've got more money than I need and I can just live and do whatever I want to do. And that does impress certain people, but I feel that I'm only impressing them because I'm well off and that I've come from a sort of privileged background. But if I was in a rock band, I could pretend that I was from the streets and that I was a real rock and roller, you know, like proper rock and rollers like Iggy Pop and people like that. I want people to think I'm like Iggy Pop, you know, that I go around with getting my willy out and it's a big one and then, you know, throw myself on crunch glass and bleeding to show that I really believe in my art. So that's what I want people to do, you know. So can I do that, Daddy? Well, I suppose so. I could have a chat with a few people I know, you know. Can't you go, you know, to your private school you go to, see if any of your friends have got any skills on the instruments? Well, they have, Daddy, but they're not that good, really. I can only play a few chords and strum. That doesn't matter. You see, when we form one of these sort of privileged bands, you know, it's like, say, I'm doing an English accent, which is ridiculous because it's actually an American band. This accent would be much more useful if I was talking about something like, I don't know, Mumford and Sons, for example, you know, or the Levelers, one of these bands, you know. And you must pretend you're left wing and you must champion left wing values. Of course, you are left wing up until it comes to do with any of the equity and you know, the money I've got stashed in various sorts of tax-free places. Please don't draw the attention to that if you can, you know. And if you're a good boy, you know, and you can get this sorted out, I'm sure it'll be very successful, of course. You know, all of my friends' sons and daughters who have absolutely no musical talent whatsoever are now working in all the major magazines, so they'll champion it for you. You know, there may be a place on that Epstein Island Lolita airplane for you after all, if you can just pull yourself together. That's where we start with here at number 10, is the Strokes. That is what they represent to me. I'm not saying they are any of those things, but that's how it comes across to me. Put on the album, what you get is a cod load of thrashy, bloody rock music. It doesn't have the sort of beauty and majesty of a rock band like Rush. It doesn't have the gutsy viscerality of a rock band like AC/DC. It doesn't have the sort of American, you know, sexiness of a ZZ Top. It doesn't have any of those things. These are not great rock bands. They're not supposed to be perceived as great rock bands. The blokes aren't particularly charismatic. You know, there's no real chins in this band. You know, it's like they lack chins. And chins is always a thing. You know, if you haven't got a chin, grow a beard like ZZ Top or get out of the business. But when you've got a strong jaw like a Robert Plant or an Ian Gillan or whoever these people are, you know, Michael Hutchence, all of them, strong jaw, right, and a mighty physique. Knowing how to move on stage. Strokes don't have to do any of this. It's all cod crap. It's nonsense, right? The songs are sort of catchy, but anyone can write catchy songs once you understand the formula, right? People say that you can't fluke this, you can't manufacture it. Rick Beato keeps going on saying there's no things as an industry planned. Well, I might just do a video after this one about industry plants and give my opinion, because I think it's all about the parameters, you know, that you utilise. For me, the Strokes almost embody the idea of the post-millennium plant in the music industry. Right, so that's all I've got at number 10. At number 9 on my list, I have got the self-titled album by The Band, right? Now, The Band are actually a set of very, very good musicians. Very good musicians. Coming out of very early rock and roll, Levon Helm, for example, their drummer, was perhaps one of the great sort of rockabilly rock and roll drummers of the early 60s. I am not accusing these guys of not being musical. I do own Robbie Robertson's solo album that he brought out in the 1980s, which I enjoy very much. The Band are very, very good musicians. Very good musicians. Now, if we take the greatest guitarist that's ever lived, probably Lenny Breau, or Al Ellsworth, but let's use Lenny Breau, for example. In 1961, Lenny Breau in Canada decided to do his first recording. He was very young, and I did a video on here where I said that this is, you know, perhaps some of the greatest, you know, virtuoso jazz guitar ever recorded. It's astonishing. But when you look at the rhythm section on that, it's Rick Danko and Levon Helm. These can play jazz, they are monster players, and they come out of something that's very, very, and if I carry on talking like this, I'm going to bloody like them. They come out of something that's very interesting, right? Which is the move of Dylan to take this idea of this sort of middle-class coffee house adaptation of American folk forms. This wasn't Leadbelly. It was a sort of, you know, American middle-class and I suppose Jewish affection for that, right? Mixed with, the reason I say Jewish, with a sort of interesting musical numbers, a more narrative approach to songwriting, aligned with a sort of political and cultural bents, right? These people could have just stayed there doing their sort of coffee house folk music and letting all the electric rock going on at the time by. But of course, electric rock wasn't going on in 1963 and 64, was it? No, what was going on was jazz. And jazz and the rhythm section was coming in. And there's a wonderful fusion between folk and jazz going on. And it influences some of the bands on this list, and I'm now talking in my normal voice because I've stumbled into something that is actually quite profound, and I'm going to pursue it. Tom Wilson, who is the guy that produced those early Bob Dylan albums, also discovered Frank Zappa and signed him up, and he was the man who enabled Zappa to do Freak Out, which really ushers in the era of rock music for me, recorded in 1965, coming out in 1966. This is when rock music takes on all these things from jazz and the avant-garde and music concrete, and rhythm and blues. It all comes out at that point. Tom Wilson's a giant in terms of doing this, and his work pre-Dylan was with people like Cecil Taylor and John Coltrane. This is why when you look at Bitches Brew, you have to understand that Bitches Brew and Freak Out are coming out of these folk musicians, right? And that is why you see, say, on certain Dylan albums, this idea of the sidelong epic that I've just talked about, Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands by Dylan off the album Blonde on Blonde. It's an incredible achievement, and I know that. And the band almost become the virtuoso embodiment of this approach. I should love this, right? This isn't like the Strokes, where the Strokes are so preposterous it's easy to pull them down. How could I've never criticised the band before, right? I've listened to their albums. I've picked one of the earlier albums. It's got a hit on it, I think. I picked this one because this really represents that time. All right. Why do I hate it? Well, I suppose it goes back to my youth. It goes back to when I first got interested in rock music. And I started to explore the idea of guitarists: Jeff Beck, Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page, Ritchie Blackmore. I got into Ritchie Blackmore and Jimmy Page very quickly, but Jeff Beck, Eric Clapton and Hendrix were more esoteric for me when I was like 11, 12, 13. In getting interested in Eric Clapton, I went and bought some Cream albums, and I loved that material. And it wasn't just the guitar playing, it was the songs and the songwriting. Loved it. But then Eric Clapton went off the boil, didn't he? He started taking some sort of influence, which I thought was awful. We all loved Layla, that was great, but I went and got that album, that was bloody awful. That could be in this place here, but I've spoken about it. Layla's awful, it just gets subsumed into a whole bunch of twangy Americana mess. What is this idea of Americana? Right, what is the idea of Americana? And why is it rated so highly? Why do people think that Americana's good? And what do I mean by Americana? Well, for me, Americana is that middle class Jewish appropriation of what they thought was this American folk tradition. And in rock and roll, at its most virtuoso, this is embodied in the band. Right? And this approach almost like pollutes a whole bunch of musicians, Eric Clapton being one. Now, I got introduced to this because one night I got very excited because Martin Scorsese, who I'd heard of, had made this film, The Last Waltz, and it was premiering on British television. And Eric Clapton was in it. That was enough for me to watch it, and I taped it. It was one of the most boring musical experiences I've ever had in my life. It was actually painful. And I sat and waited for Clapton. And when Clapton came out, he was as awful as everybody else. But it was populated with a whole bunch of artists. I think that sitting there for the 2 hours, watching that film, right, and seeing Dylan, and seeing Neil Young, and seeing Van Morrison, right, and it all backed up by the band, which were the most boring group I'd ever heard of in my life. Whatever I liked about rock or blues and jazz, they did not exhibit in any shape or form. It was twangy. It was just horrible. Musically, it was horrible. Now, why do I think it's horrible? You know why? Because I think I didn't get taken in by their idea of American music. Why? Because I'd been educated in jazz. And jazz was an innovative, very sophisticated music form. Jazz emerging in 1917 with the original Dixieland Jazz Band set the world alight. And people went out and tried to find what was going on. And what they found was a new music form, which had sort of come out of basically American, you could say classical music. W.C. Handy, you know, the first published blues, is actually something that exists on paper, inspired by some weird folk musician sat on a station platform somewhere twanging a guitar with a knife. Well, not twanging, sliding all over it with a knife. Had inspired this, but what W.C. Handy did wasn't that. And the popularity of that created a new, exciting form of music, jazz and blues. And at this point, where's this? Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, Leroy Carr, whoever it is, it's urban blues. Now, the commercial need for that meant that those labels went out searching for this blues. And then they were followed by people like Alan Lomax, John Hammond, who were going down to find what they wanted to find. And the musicians down there, the ones not good enough really, I hate to say this, the ones not really in the same bracket as like Art Tatum or, Fletcher Henderson or Count Basie, those who were just busking decided to adapt their style. And they create the idea of Americana in the 1920s. I know this is totally against what everyone else says. But Blind Lemon Jefferson is a busking musician going around playing the streets. And the record company comes out and say, can you play this new thing, the blues? Yep. Right? And a tradition of American folk music, okay, which is already morphing into something really exciting, starts to get the taint of educated, upper, elitist, middle class types embodying what they want onto these musicians. We get the discovery of Leadbelly. Leadbelly is in prison. He gives them what they want. Now, he's an incredible singer, he's an incredible guitar player. He has the wealth of American folk music, but what does he sing? Children's songs, silly little ditties, songs about animals, and a few blues. That's what really is going on here. This isn't the high art of Duke Ellington or Louis Armstrong, okay? This is constructed. And then this leftist, educated, middle-class contingent decide to take this, and Woody Guthrie's the guy that does this. In the UK, it doesn't happen. The guy that takes on this influence in the UK is the guy that does my chewing gum lose its flavour on the bedpost overnight, Lonnie Donegan, I forgot his name. And he's more respectful of the populist comedic aspects of this music, and he creates something that ends up in the Beatles. And the Beatles, that is able to take on the technology of jazz and bring it back in. But in America, there is this sort of snobby elitism that has decided that there's something worthy and authentic. And that is what undoes the band. There we go, an actual intellectual discussion. You didn't come for that, did you? I didn't think I was going to do it. Once you have that, once you have the elite, once you have the critical elite, and they are championing these sort of visceral forms, this sort of patronising, look how great Leadbelly is. He doesn't understand it. He's just a murderer. He's just a guy that's got out of prison. But in himself is embodied the tradition of the Negro in America. The suffering is all in it. It's all in his voice, right? He probably doesn't know it himself, but we can see it and we can show it. And by show it, we can show what good people are by championing this. The viscerality, the sort of gutsiness, the true to yourselfness that we see in Leadbelly is also embodied in the early rock and rollers. You know, they have it in bucket loads, it's visceral rock energy, and then what happens? All the intellectual musicians come in, and we don't like them because we're the intellectual ones, not them. And they come in and they start doing all their bloody utilising the form, like happened with jazz early on. You know, they all come in, especially the white people, they come in and they start making it all clever, right? Too many notes, too many scales. It's like Mozart when the king said, you know, you can have too many notes, can't you? But Mozart was good because we decided he's good. These weren't. And I spent a lot of my time, I'm pretending to be one of these critical elites now, putting down these people. It is very simple to do, you know. Someone like Rick Wakeman with his bloody classically trained fingers and his big golden cape was easy to poke fun at. And he seemed to embrace it. He seemed to go with it, you know, probably because it made him some money. But it was strange that even with us putting it down, the public still seemed to like it. No, what we need is a proper rock and roll band with people who don't, ignoramuses who don't know what they're doing. And this is the band I have at number 3 and their first debut album, The Ramones. That's what the Ramones are to me. They're ignoramuses. Now you might think, oh, that's good, that is. It's good that they're ignoramuses. It's good that they can't play their instrument because what you hear is this visceral energy coming off it. Well, I'm sorry, I don't hear it. That's me. I'm probably wrong. Motorhead have got it. AC/DC have got it. Led Zeppelin have got it. Black Sabbath, Deep Purple have got it. They've all got it. Visceral rock and roll energy. All right? Even Levon Helm, if you go back, I mentioned it before, if you go back to that early rockabilly drumming, you suddenly go, oh my God, he was on fire. These were talented at putting across visceral rock and roll energy. I think MC5 could do that well. Right? The Ramones aren't very good at it. It's like they are a manufactured idea of what an American rock band should be. But on top of that, all the blues, all the soul, all the stuff that comes from people like Sister Rosetta Tharpe and Howlin' Wolf, all that stuff that makes visceral rock and roll what it is, all that dirt, the Chuck Berry, the Little Richards, it's in bloody AC/DC. But it ain't in the Ramones. It's been removed, and it's been removed for a reason. And nobody wants to say what that reason is. But why is, in this type of punk, that removed? Why have they removed soul and blues from it? Why? It's because the people who are critiquing it cannot tell the difference. The people who are making it cannot tell. And what they do recognise is their own. And in recognising their own, they champion it, and they don't even know it. So that vocal side of I want to ride alone is not the same as listening to a Bon Scott. Because Bon Scott understands it. He understands what that viscerality really is. Now, it could be that it operates like a lot of let us call it white music. I hate to use that term, but you know when you see a white audience and they are sitting clapping along on the wrong beat, you know. Everybody's doing the brand new dance now. Come on, baby. Now, if that feels wrong to you, it's because you have a feel for the very thing I'm talking about. If it doesn't, you're probably one of these people that doesn't understand what I'm talking about. Now, can we have that degree of subtlety in this discussion when it comes to the viscerality of rock and roll? Is it right for me to say when I put on Soundgarden and hear those riffs and hear what's in Chris Cornell's voice that I hear something which points to me the viscerality and simplicity and just pure, animalistic expression that's embodied in rock and roll, which I actually do love? Am I wrong to point it out when it's not existing in the Ramones music? Or is it I just have more of a love of music that has come from, for the want of a better term, Black American music? At number 7, I've had an album I've never spoken about before. I've decided to come out and say it. At number 7, I've got Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. I can't even remember what the title of that album is. It's the famous one. The one that's got the streets on the front, I think. Is it called The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars? So what we have here is a very strange thing, and I have a big problem with David Bowie, right? I hate the Strokes. I don't hate the band. I'm interested in them as musicians. They just don't make music I like, and I really don't like it, and I reject the idea that the band is somehow a 5-star album and everything should be treated as it is, especially by Rolling Stone, as being something absolutely sublime. The Ramones is the same. I don't hate David Bowie. I think David Bowie's incredible. In fact, when I did a video a few weeks ago on what I thought were the 10 greatest albums of the 21st century, his Black Star album was in there. But apart from that album, I've never really been able to find an album by David Bowie that I like everything on it. Of course I like Life on Mars, of course I like Heroes, of course I like, Ashes to Ashes. I love Fame, that's a great tune. I love Let's Dance, especially when bloody Stevie Ray Vaughan kicks in. So there's a lot I like about David Bowie. But this album, which sounds as though it's in the same place as many rock albums at that time, a lot of rock riffing. I mean, what's the difference between this and, say, Rush's debut album, which I absolutely love? That's a lot of rock riffing with some bit vocals that aren't my cup of tea. And yet I love that album. There's some great riffs on here. There's some great songs on here. But those riffs don't really set me alight. The playing doesn't set me alight. What's it lacking? It seems to be lacking something to me, but maybe I'm not getting it. Maybe I'm not getting the genius of David Bowie to reinvent himself. So this is a guy that was at odds with what was going on in the mid-60s, because the tradition he'd come out of was a sort of English musical, almost like musical comedy, Who's his great influences? Anthony Newley. He's doing all sorts of comedy songs, telling stories. Now, when he finally makes it and he comes up with something people like, which is Ground Control to Major Tom, I love that. That's incredible. I do like it, but it has now taken on a place in our culture where it's seen as being great art, but it's a novelty song. It just happens to have some incredible melodies. Bowie could write great melodies, right? But when he has this idea of then becoming a sort of glam rock star, or then becoming a soul, the Thin White Duke, or becoming this or that, I don't believe he can ever pull it off, because I don't believe he's a rock and roller in the way that the Beatles were rock and roller. So when the Beatles have this idea of, we've got to a certain point, let's create a band within the band, and they do Sgt. Pepper, David Bowie then with this decides to do the same thing, the band within a band idea. So this is his Sgt. Pepper. Now, yeah, there are some good songs on here, but none of it, every time I put this album on, to my ears, it's absolutely tiresome. The only thing I like about it is the production. Ken Scott, incredible. But in terms of the music, I just don't get, I have to say, I don't get it. But this album actively annoys me. And when you hear riffs like, I wish that riff got to me like all the great riffs do. I wish it was like, and I wish when Bowie's vocals come in, you know, rather than being and Dylan, Bowie's a great singer, but he decides to take on this nasally thing. It's not the same as Ozzy going, can we run too? That gets to me, that does. I don't get this one. I don't get it, right? And I don't think it's as good as everybody says. David Bowie seems to put a spell on people, right? What about Mark Boland? I like Mark Boland. That is visceral rock music. It's got all the things I like. I don't know why this hasn't got it, right? The other band that doesn't have it is Roxy Music. I don't get them either. But that first album by Roxy is great. It's still crap, but it's great. Because I sort of enjoy it. You know, I enjoy some of the tracks on there. I just don't enjoy this one. Now, because it's rated so highly and people think it's one of the greatest albums ever made, and because it doesn't seem to get the hate that Close to the Edge or bloody Dark Side of the Moon has, especially back in the old days of the 1980s, this Bowie always escaped it. Why? Because everybody in the 80s wanted to be David Bowie. Why do they want to be David Bowie? Because I think here in this country it gave, you know, sort of middle class, sort of educated, posh, not very cool people a blueprint in the same way the Velvet Underground did to the sort of, you know, the critical elite that wrote the stories. You know, Bowie's amazing. I'm not knocking him. But this album, I hate. And the title of this is 10 Classic Albums I Hate. Am I going to say it's a bad album? No. The Strokes, that's a bad album. The band album that I put up is objectively, I think it's good. I've got serious on this video. I didn't expect it. Don't worry. I'll get back to something that I normally do. But that's the way it is. I can't help it. I can't help the way I go on these videos. That's the way it is. It's just not my thing and I don't get it. At number 6, I have the incredible, influential Blonde on Blonde by Dylan. Now, I'm not really, in terms of musically, I'm not a fan of Dylan. But those early albums where you get Subterranean Homesick Blues or you get Mr. Tambourine Man, I like all that. How can you not like songs like that? Right? How can you not like a Rolling Stone? It's a great song, isn't it? Now, last night, to prepare for this, because I bought this album knowing how important and influential it is. One of the first double albums, a conceptual album, got a sidelong epic, and I thought, I've got to have Blonde on Blonde, so I bought it. And a little bit like watching The Last Waltz, I was horrified by it. I thought it was the worst thing I've ever heard, right? And I've always hated it. Right, I've grown to like those early Dylan albums, but I've always hated Blonde on Blonde. It's on the list, and I here should be saying, you know, it sounds hurried, it's like unfocused, it's sort of, everything goes on for too long, the production's horrible, it's middly and jangly, there's no real arrangements going on, and you have Dylan's voice droning away over 4 sides, it's too much, blah, blah, blah. I could have said all that at this point. The only problem is, and this is where I might be changing, and this is where videos like this are interesting, because last night I thought, right, well, I've got an idea of what I'm going to say on each of these, right? But when it comes to Blonde on Blonde, what am I going to say? I need some fresh inspiration. So I put my headphones on, and I put on Sad-Eyed Lady from the Lowlands, or whatever it's called on. This is 10 minutes, right? Now, it is a dirge, and it does go on for way too long. And they're just sat, you think there'd be at least some sort of psychedelic jamming in the middle or something. It's not even like that. They just basically play a really boring song for 10 minutes straight. It got on my sidelong epics, and people could have said, you can't have that on. It's not a sidelong epic. It's only 10 minutes long. Yeah, but 10 minutes of Bob Dylan is 20 minutes of anybody else. Come on, let's be honest. Right? But when I put it on last night, okay, and I'm sat there with the headphones on, and it comes jangling in. And I'm listening to his lyrics, and I'm always having the reaction I have to Dylan. Yeah, I know he's a great songwriter, but the music sounds horrible, and his voice sounds horrible. It's in the lyrics. Listen to the lyrics. I don't know what the lyrics are, but it's something like this. And she wanders away to see the chill of the forest filled with overkill. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, comes a flying bat. And I thought, that must be that. It's stuff like this. Something I don't know what he's on about at all. I mean, maybe I'm supposed to appreciate the poetry of it. You know, the lady's got no clothes. She's got a ruddy nose. Someone's weed on her toes. And there she stands all alone and broke. So I get my jut and give it one last tug. And I say to myself, there's only one way that I can save the day, and that's with me. I don't know what I mean, they're not as good as Dylan's lyrics, because he does at least spend a bit of time to make them rhyme. But I sat there and thought, this sad-eyed lady, I didn't even know what he's on about. Sad-eyed lady of the lowlands. He always sounds a bit like he's a bit of a misogynist and putting women down all the time. She's already there. I feel like, yeah, because you're an ugly little bastard who has now got that sort of, it's like Phil Spector. They're all like it, ugly little bastards that got into music, and suddenly the women are interested. So what do? They always photograph themselves with a attractive woman on the album cover. Look, I can pull an attractive woman even though I'm a little scrotty, curly-haired imp, right? So all of that's going on. But I have to say this, and even though it's on the list, and the list was written last night, I might have changed my mind. And this is why I come back to this, because next time, Blonde on Blonde may not be on this list. May not. Because in amongst all that stuff, right, I stopped listening to the lyrics. And I started to listen to his vocal melody. Although supported by a pretty simple chord progression, although supported by pretty weak arrangements. But I suddenly thought, I don't know how he's doing this, but this is a bloody great vocal melody. It's really great. Now, last night I watched the Kylie Minogue documentary. And at the other end of the spectrum, away from Dylan, which is really critically received, we have Kylie's first single. My imagination and deep conversation, I got to have it all my life, like I'm in love with you, like I'm in love with me. And I was listening to this melody. Look at me trying to sing it. This is bloody genius melodic writing, like proper genius. And Kylie would have had to be able to sing, really sing. She might not have like a Tina Turner voice, but that melody is hard to sing. Is it my imagination? I got to have you. And then I missed that. Then it goes, it goes up a tone. And then it goes, no, I'm in love with you. And then only dreams come true, the dominant of I. And it's a bloody incredible song. Now, I think the thing that I might be missing is my ability to analyse a piece of cheesy pop music like Kylie's and go, this is heavy bit of songwriting. And the people who wrote it really, really knew what they were doing. And it doesn't follow the shite that we hear nowadays. This is the thing that Rick Beato champions. Right? That Dylan's songwriting, from a pure pop song point of view, when he chooses to be, has that same quality. And this is why people like the Byrds were able to cover it, and then you go, well, that's absolutely beautiful when they do it. Or Jimi Hendrix does what he does with it. He creates incredible pop songs where the canvas is blank. And the canvas is so blank, it allowed everybody to draw on it, whether it was Frank Zappa, Jimi Hendrix, Cream, whoever it was. The bloke is a genius. Perhaps Blonde on Blonde is the blank canvas upon what rock music he's drawn. So maybe I've got to, and now I get it. But this is what it's all about. It's about getting stuff, isn't it? Maybe I'm about to get it. One album I will never get is Horses by Patti Smith. That's what I've got at number 5. Right? Now you'll see a theme here. Incompetent musicians strumming a few chords, writing what they think is heavy poetry, and going out and thinking that the artistic work is in their stance. And that's what Patti Smith is to me. There's not much there musically for me to listen to. There's not much there aesthetically for me to look at. Her voice is pretty awful. So we come down to these lyrics, right? Does she have the melodies that a Dylan has? No, she doesn't have that, does she? So why is this so important? I tell you why. Because even more than very underground, what Patti Smith does is create the blueprint for the sort of college intellectual entrance into the world of rock and roll without any skill. Right? There's an argument we could put forth of whether punk is a reaction against the skill level that we see in progressive rock, jazz rock, fusion and classic rock, Led Zeppelin and all that. It's a reaction against that because normal kids couldn't express themselves within that remit. That's the narrative, isn't it? And the thing is that Patti Smith was good until the Sex Pistols exposed her middle-class educated colleginess. And the critics were stupid enough to go, yeah, we've got to reject anything of quality. So the fact that Patti Smith is well-read is crap. It actually is crap. I know I'm well-read and I know I did English literature at Oxford, but that's not the point. We shouldn't be showing it off. Right? John Lydon's a great poet and he don't know it. Oh, I just did the poem myself. So Patti Smith really is undone by the very thing that gave her purchase in the first place, wasn't she? Okay? But if she's coming out of the New York Dolls and the Stooges, both of those bands have some sort of trashy rock and rollness. Even if they're bleaching the soul and blues out of their music, they're still at least dressing up and performing and coming across like a Little Richard, you know. There is something in there. Of course, they all wanted to be Jim Morrison, didn't they? They all wanted to be Jim Morrison. I mean, Iggy Pop is the Burt Reynolds to Jim Morrison, which is the Marlon Brando, isn't it? Really. You know, and we champion Burt Reynolds, and we go, he's a great actor, but he's there really as a carbon copy of Marlon Brando, which just became so successful that nobody wanted to mention it. Iggy's the same. Some great songs there. Patti Smith. It's too intellectual. It's too much like having sharp haircuts, hanging out with Laurie Anderson and walking around Central Park with a little dog on a lead. That's what Patti Smith is. And it's too elitist. And I don't mind elitism when the music blows you away. That's my problem with Patti Smith with Horses. Right, and number 4, I've got Bruce Springsteen, Born to Run. Right. This album, again, will always come up in the 10, 20, 30 greatest albums ever made. Born to Run. Why? Now, Bruce Springsteen was very successful. Why? What does he do? He does something. Maybe it's because I'm English, I don't get it. Maybe if you're American working class, he speaks to you. Right? And maybe he is able to make music as dumb as you need to walk into your sort of American bar in the middle of nowhere and stick a penny in the jukebox in some cliched way and ask yourself for some sort of alcoholic drink while you go and play, pool with a bunch of big beardy blokes that are going to rape you later on, and do that too. Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen. Is that a cliche? Is that what it represents to me? And that's what I don't like about it. Born to Run, the album, actually hurts my ears. It sounds disgusting. It's raucous and it's just jars. And it doesn't jar in a way so that Ornette Coleman jars. It's not that type of jarring. It jars because they have, I hate to say it, what do I feel? They don't seem to understand the things that they are deliberately mining out of American music. See, I think there's a fault with American music. I've already explained it. It's this revisionism that happens so quickly in America. So quick they're looking around for their great music form. Where's the geniuses? Where's the great art from America? Where is it? Where is it? Jazz is the great gift of America to the world. And jazz is one of the greatest forms of music, you know. I was watching bloody Henry Rollins say this on a video last night. It's a great gift. I might be Henry Rollins and in Black Flag, but my favourite album is John Coltrane. He played pure music. I agree. You know I agree. Right, but there is a way the Americans look back at their history and it is created. It's not real. It's too new. They look back at Robert Johnson as though this is some archaic, like prehistoric music thing that contains all the roots. Right? In my country, we go back to Purcell or somebody like that. It's 500 years ago. We go back to these composers and we still see these as being in the middle. Our musical tradition is so old that we don't have to bolster it up. You know, if you're British, you will sit and listen to Elgar, you know, and with Land of Hope and Glory, and right, that's like, God, how many decades before Robert Johnson? Or, you know, Stovepipe Williams or Big Blind Betty or whoever it is, making their little bloody, you know, novelty music for a local market existing in America somewhere, only to be pounced upon later as though it's some great statement. Why? Because we have to find the great statement. I think on this video I am drilling down to an issue I have with American music. I have an issue with it. Right? Is it really as good as everybody says? Or is it just fact that it was new and a novelty music and then great musicians came in and did something that was great? And when it comes to rock music, rock and roll, the best stuff was done by British people, not Americans. And Americans have to look back into something which is actually, they can't get away from their own history. You know, so they're trying to elevate what are simple folk songs and trying to make them appear like they are Mozart or Beethoven or Duke Ellington or John Coltrane. But it's not. And I can see through it. And I've always seen through it. Right? And it can be done really well. But maybe when I do these videos, and I didn't expect this, I started this off with the Strokes, it was a comedy video, wasn't it? But this video's not that funny, is it? I haven't been that funny. I've actually tried to explain my issues with these albums. It's a con. They're not doing that much, right? It's a product of the postmodernist late 20th century idea that we have to distrust anything that's constructed, that has quality, that is arranged, that has detail, that has thought, that has depth. And why do you have all that? To drill down to something which is more profound, which is deeper, which isn't contained in the song Happy Birthday or I Do Like to Be Beside the Seaside. These are just silly novelty songs. But what we've done here is we've had people singing silly novelty songs, right? And these songs are no better than Kylie Minogue's I Should Be So Lucky. In fact, that is more sophisticated from a musical point of view. But that is designed just to be here and gone tomorrow. Causing Kylie Minogue all this like, oh, who am I? What am I about? And then she goes on an Odyssey, which is now covered in you know, 3 expensive Netflix documentaries. And what do we learn from that? That she realised that it was okay to make great pop music. It's okay to make great pop music, right? But we have a false division in rock music where we can't tell what's good. And it's because the postmodernists believe that there is no good. And in that vacuum, In that postmodernist vacuum where you don't have any idea of objective quality, your prejudices come in by the back door. And the elitism of the great art, the elitism of being able to appreciate Picasso or Goya or Shakespeare or Milton, right? The ability to do that is replaced with the very thing that comes from that which is toxic. And it's the idea of the elite themselves. At number 3 on this list, I've got London Calling by The Clash. The punk thing in the UK is a dead end again. It's all championed. We have it in place in our mind, don't we? That there was all this music, all this prog stuff, and it was all crap. And then punk came out in 1977, and it all washed it away. I was watching an interview with Frank Zappa last night, and he goes, "What do you think to the punk?" And he said, "I think it's manufactured by, the critical elite. People come out, and it was all about the clothing. It was easy for the media to champion it because Malcolm McLaren had dressed them all in a certain way. Now, he happened to do it to a band that was talented in terms of their ability to rock. They could rock. Sex Pistols could rock in a way that the Ramones couldn't. That's true. They just happened to have that chemistry-wise. But John Lydon was in the tradition of the great sort of Irish stroke British autodidact poet. And he's profound. And the Sex Pistols are great because you have that, are they, what Zappa said, just the product of Malcolm McLaren's sort of machinations, it has no real depth? Or is it really the beginning of the great sort of poetic statement of this sort of British Zoroaster-like figure of John Lydon? Well, it's both, isn't it? But the truth is, my belief, that those early bands, Stranglers, The Damned, Sex Pistols, who else was there at that time, those 3 bands were actually an extension of what was going on in progressive rock. That's those things within King Crimson, Peter Hamill, those ideas had already formed, right? And it was actually the drawing in of the showiness of prog that created punk. But then we get this second wave come in, and it's discovered by the critics, and they start to champion. And they'd rather champion something like The Clash, because The Clash are easy for them to get their heads round. Because it's more just obviously revolutionary, leftist, sort of student intellectual stuff. Fronted by someone who was not just from the middle classes, but was from the extremely privileged classes, looking in through the window at people like John Lydon. And then John Lydon gets portrayed as almost like a comic character, right? He goes off and does metal boxes and look a genius, right? Metal boxes are way 100 million times better, as is the first public image limited album. It's so much better than London Calling. By the time the Damned get to 1980, they are making sidelock goth punk epics. The Stranglers sound like a progressive rock band, but a progressive rock band with a really bad attitude and potty mouths. It's something else, but the Clash are almost like... it's as though they pander to what the critics want, which is 4 Che Guevaras playing... their COD version of rock and roll, like the Ramones, that takes out the visceral energy of it. Now, the things with the Clash, every now and then, they'd write the best song ever written. London Calling's incredible. Rock the Cosmos, incredible. Their cover version of Should I Stay Up or Should I Go is incredible. White Riot is incredible. If you put all those on an album, I would love that album. But the rest of it is filler. And I object to the fact that this one will be in the top 5 every single time London Calling. All right? It's not as good as combat rock. It just annoys me. It annoys me not because it's not as good as people say, because it embodies this thing that has held any musician back trying to get into this industry in the last 40 years, like myself and a whole bunch of people here. What held us back? These twats. Am I bitter about it? Yeah. I'm 58 years old, I've got my own YouTube channel, and now I could say it. I could say it. I did some gigs at the weekend. I came up against that sort of educated middle class again. And it was toxic, and I've seen it again. I don't know whether to tell the story of this weekend, but I'm up on top. This is probably why I'm being serious today, rather than just having some joke, which is tongue-in-cheek where I go away, and I feel that in my own little way I was able to go to this sort of shabby, educated, middle-class elite with their bloody aunties who are like painters and have their, place out in the south of France that they can go stop in the summer holidays, and they come back and then, they may get sent off to public school or whatever, and they have their friends and they leave school. And it's like a class of people. It's like what inhabits the civil service here in my country. This is what rock and roll is. This is what rock and roll has become. And this is what you get in my country is London calling. Now, when we go back to America and we look at their insecurities about themselves, right, they're embodied, that insecurity, that bad mental idea of we've got to champion stuff that is really tat. And we've got to take our tat and inflict it on the world, haven't we? That's what the Americans are like. We need to get into Afghanistan, blow the hell out of the place, and then fill it with McDonald's. That's basically the cultural sort of heritage of America, isn't it? And my country's full of it. We sat there watching 50% of the programs I watched when I grew up were American. We were subservient to American culture like everybody else all over the world. But we had the bloody Beatles, didn't we? We had the Beatles. And they were amazing. We've got the Beatles, the Americans go. We got the Beatles. We got stuff as good as the Beatles. The Beatles are they're great. We love the Beatles. But we've got stuff as good as the Beatles. Who? We got the Doors. No, after the Beatles. No, there's no Doors without the Beatles. I don't know. And we've got the Beach Boys. Really? Yeah. But the Beach Boys come from that period in between rock and roll and rock music, which was just sort of inane pop music. I mean, God, they did it really well. Some of those songs are so catchy. But isn't it just like listening to Eddie Cochran? Wasn't Eddie Cochran more of a talent? Yeah, but Eddie Cochran's died. Brian Wilson's a talent. He's like a real talent. Brian, are you listening to this conversation? Yeah, I am. And I don't know whether I can do what the Beatles do. I really want to, but I'm going to go insane trying to do better than the Beatles. I will. For this case of America, I will do better than the Beatles. We'll get in the studio and do it now. Okay, well, I'll need a big budget. I'll need, I don't know, every session musician you've got, every instrument you've got, all the weird things in the world. I'm going to pick it up and throw it at a whole bunch of what, Brian? Well, the same sort of pop songs I've always written. It ain't the Beatles. It doesn't travel like From Love Me Do to Tomorrow Never Knows. Pet Sounds does not do that. The songs on it are not as good as Run, Run, Get Around, I Get Around. Ooh, I get around, I get around. That's bloody brilliant. Right? He's thrashing about how can I beat the Beatles? I'm going to do it. He doesn't do it on Pet Sounds. Pet Sounds only champion because the Americans want to have their Sgt. Pepper. And they point to that because it came out before. There is nothing on there that equals Sgt. Pepper or Revolver. There just isn't. What you have is a lot of already nostalgic appropriations of a period of Brian Wilson's teenage past that has now gone because he's in the future. He's actually lamenting it and going, I don't know what to do. Come on, Brian, come up with something as good as the Beatles. Right? After Pet Sounds, he does on one track. Good Vibrations. Good Vibrations is it. That's amazing. But there's no Good Vibrations on Pet Sounds. Don't think that there is. Wouldn't it be nice if it and don't go here but listen to all the harmonic twists and turns. Yeah, like the Kylie Minogue I've just sung, and not as I can sing that much easier than I can sing that Kylie Minogue song. That bridge from the verse to the chorus on that Kylie Minogue song, I wish I'd bloody knew. I wish, Beato needs to do what makes that great. I ain't going to tell you. I'll be here for about half an hour trying to work out what the hell's going on there. It's like about 3 bloody, key changes all going in. It's incredible. This is all a big con. Pet Sounds at number 2. So what have I got at number 1? My nemesis. Of course, it's Astral Weeks. Right? Astral Weeks. It's become like my calling card. When I was on Rick Beato, all the stuff I've done, what was the first thing we had to speak about? Me going on about Van Morrison and how crap he is. Right? Is Van Morrison part of the elites? No. Is he a real example of who the elites champion? No, that's like the Clash. That was like that, or Joy Division. It's that type of stuff they champion. Not really. Van Morrison is there. He's there in the early days, as the Beatles kick off. Bands emerge all over you get the Kinks, you get the Who, and in Ireland you get them. And they're bloody great. Baby Please Don't Go is great. Gloria's great. It's real visceral rock and roll. But put through that sort of Irish folk song, and more importantly, that Irish visionary thing we were talking about that Dylan had. He's a poet like Dylan because he's part of the tradition. Van Morrison has that in his system. He has this idea of the poet, the true poet, the mystical poet, like the T.S. Eliot, the James Joyce. It's in his culture. And so, if you're saying all this thing that creates rock music is swilling around, where you've got jazz and blues crossing over, right? And that's something that Dylan's doing, and you said it's on Bitches Brew and it's on Zappa's album. This is you're championing all this, aren't you? And you could even see the effect of that songwriting on the jazz music like Gary Burton. That's where fusion comes from. Why don't you like it? Why can't you appreciate it? Why can't you appreciate it when Van Morrison, after proving he's a great songwriter, rocks up in New York in 1967, goes into the studio and improvises this mystical album. Yeah, you don't like it because there's chord changes. There's not enough chord changes for you. And it's not that well recorded because it's 67. And his voice can grate on your nerves. I understand that. But it doesn't grate on your nerves when you put the lyrics for... You don't understand it, Andy. You're not listening to the lyrics of Astral Weeks. Astral Weeks, it's this mystical idea. And that could well be the truth. It could well be the truth. The playing's horrible on it. It's got bloody Connie Kay on drums and Richard Davis on bass. Incredible jazz musicians. But they just seem to be twanging away, not really know what they're trying to do. It seems like things are being forced together. After this, Van Morrison makes Moondance. That's a great album. And then he does St. Dominic's Preview. And that's an incredible album with brilliant songs on it. And there are 2 10-minute jams on there. And he does what I expected Astral Weeks to do. Maybe I'm looking at it, and in the same way you could go back to Freak Out by Frank Zappa and say, well, it's not really like bloody what he was doing on, Joe's Garage. But it's in the embryo, and it's groundbreaking because of this. But you don't listen to Freak Out like you listen to Joe's Garage or Overnight Sensation, do you? Now I don't really. I can appreciate it's great. Well, why can't you do that with Astral Weeks by Van Morrison? Zappa worked with Van Morrison. He brought him in to sing Dead Girls of London. So he understood what Van was doing. Maybe you just don't get it. And I think on this video, which didn't go the way I planned, and it's a bloody epic, I have to say, this video is an epic. Because I was going to come here and do another comedy video today. But actually, this is far more important, that I take all this stuff that I've been taking the mickey out and take you on this journey. What's my conclusion at the end of this video? My conclusion is this, if I'm really honest. I am right to point at these and say, once you have that postmodernist idea that quality is all relative, that everything's a social construction, and there is no real objective quality in art, it's all about what you like and what you don't like, right? Then I am correct that that allows elitism to come through the back door. That allows God to come in the back door. It also allows the leftist God to come through the back door, which is, of course, Karl Marx. Now, Karl Marx is a genius as well, but only having that ideology to measure stuff by takes you to a certain point. And the Clash are the obvious aesthetic band that you'd have by someone who's got that worldview, right? They are the poster boys of that way of thinking, and I spot it. And what I spot in it is not the fact that I don't like it because of the, say, political agenda of these critical elites. No, it's because I recognise that the music's not as great as everyone's making out. And what they've thrown out when they threw this out was the ability of people to make music which is far more nuanced musically. Lyrical nuance is allowed. And that's the point. I think I'm right that none of this that I've talked about here has the musical sophistication and sublime beauty of A Close to the Edge or A Dark Side of the Moon or A Birds of Fire or A Bitches Brew or A Love Supreme, all the albums that I think are the greatest albums ever made. At the top of the list, Visions of the Emerald Beyond by the Mahavishnu Orchestra. Right? I think I'm right there. But how much does my allegiance to musical brilliance blind me from my ability to hear the nuance that is in some of the lyrics that underpin some of these albums that I'm not so sure about? All right? Especially when it comes to Astral Weeks. If any of these, even more than Dylan, if any of these are worthy of the title poet, surely it is Van Morrison. And surely Van Morrison is a character so fragile, so unlikely to be a rock star, a little ugly fat ginger bloke, right, who has had to put up a barrier against himself and the world to operate in this, who is sensitive, who is a troubled man, but able to put that into words which other troubled little people understand and get. Maybe the poetry of what he does requires him to have a defense up against the world, which I experienced once. Maybe if Van Morrison had been some sort of father figure that I met in the past and had taken me under his wing and talked to me and explained what he was doing and why it was so beautiful. Because that trip round Ireland that I did with Robert Plant, you know, opening up for Van Morrison, where I saw firsthand what a twat he is. And when I had this channel, I thought, I don't want to really put people down. It's not right. And I didn't realise all the views and success you could have by doing that. But then I thought, these guys are millionaires, aren't they? They're millionaires in the end. And Van Morrison's not a very nice person. You know, and there's even a phrase, a joke, which people say in the industry. There are those who like Van Morrison, and then there's those who's met him. Right? But perhaps he's covering up something because he is such an unlikely poet. Right? And perhaps he really doesn't fit into any bracket, not even the Dylan bracket or the Americana bracket. Perhaps his genius has been the integration of Irish folk music and Irish sort of mystical poetry with American roots, soul and blues and jazz. And in doing that, he opens up a realm of songwriting which is very particularly Irish, which probably, in terms of me, reaches me through people like Phil Lynott. But when we did that tour of Ireland, I can remember that we arrived, did the first gig in Dublin, jumped onto a minibus to get taken to the hotel. And we just happened to have this driver on the bus. He was this Irish guy who understood Irish history. And as he drove through Dublin, he narrated where we were. Robert Plant was in the bus with us. Now, he'd got a terrible back through his accident he had in Greece, you know, when him and his wife nearly lost their lives, and, you know, and all that stuff, the very famous sort of crash that he had. And it had, you know, I think it had wrecked his back. And so he was underpaid. So the idea was he would then jump into some, you know, private car and get driven around, and we'd stick in the minibus. But this guy was really so interested. And Robert engaged, he loved this. So he decided out of his own pocket to pay for this guy to stay with us and be our driver. And Robert sat on the minibus with us. I mean, a lot of the time he travelled with us, but he did have this bad back. But he chose to stay on the minibus with us to be a part of this storytelling that this guy was doing. And as we went on this tour, following, Van Morrison around some of the biggest and greatest tents in Ireland, we weren't just being narrated to, but we were stopping and looking around monasteries, you know, and eventually we ended up going to Galway, and we were on that sort of really mystical west coast of Ireland, you know, which is as far away as from the UK that you could get. And suddenly you get a flavour of this magical mystery, sort of the same mystery that you get when you go to Greece. And in Greece, if you wander into the countryside, it starts to become the place of myth. And I felt this with Ireland. And the stories of the great famines and all the things that had happened on there, or the feeling that the bones of the Irish were in the very soil we were looking at. You could see that the patchwork of fields that you saw in Ireland were different to the patchwork in England. Suffering was here, mystery was here, majesty was here. The giant causeway, all these things. And with this guy going around telling us about the history, and he was so funny and comedic, and he would go from ghost stories to magic to things, terrible things that happened in the past. And maybe Van Morrison is that. So, that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching it. Might have not been what you expected, but I lulled you in, didn't I, with the comedy at the start? That's quite clever. Comedy at the start, oh yeah, Andy's doing his thing. He's never done it to the Strokes before. That's good. And then we've really been able, well, I have, and you've been able to listen, to really, go deep into what I do here. The theatre of hate that exists. You know, this is the video that questions that. So I hope you appreciated it. Those were the 10 classic albums that I hate, with my reasons for hating them. Thanks for watching. See you on the next video.